My children are safe. That's what Lori Vallow told police in 2019. But 7 months later, the remains of 7-year-old JJ and 16-year-old Tylee were found buried in her husband's backyard. This isn't just a story of delusion. It's a story of apocalypse, manipulation, and murder masked as salvation. This is the story of the Vallow-Daybell Doomsday cult. The Vallow-Daybell story didn't start with a compound or a congregation. It started with two people, a shared obsession with the end of the world and a belief that they had been chosen by God, by destiny, by delusion. This so-called cult wasn't a mass movement. It was a tight circle of true believers, centered around Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. They never gave themselves a name. But after the dust settled and the bodies were counted, the world would know them as the Vallow-Daybell Doomsday cult. Their geography tells part of the story. Arizona, where Lori's fourth husband was gunned down. Idaho, where the children were buried. Hawaii, where Lori and Chad escaped to paradise while the world searched for two missing kids. The settings were picturesque. The horrors behind them were anything but. The timeline was short, just 2 years, from 2018 to 2020. But the damage they caused in that time was irreversible. Lori Vallow was a former beauty queen and self-proclaimed devoted mother. Chad Daybell was a cemetery sexton turned apocalyptic author. He wrote dozens of books predicting the end times. She devoured them. And him. They believed they were spiritual warriors, that they were destined to lead 144,000 souls through the coming apocalypse, that God spoke directly to them. And they didn't just believe in good and evil. They believed some people had already died spiritually, that their bodies were now inhabited by dark spirits, or in their words, zombies. Those marked as dark could be cast out, eliminated, redeemed through death. Their inner circle was small. Lori, Chad, Lori's brother Alex, and a handful of loyal followers. But their influence spread like wildfire. Families were torn apart. Investigations crossed state lines, and innocent people paid the ultimate price. Chad claimed he could see into the spiritual realm. He assigned numerical light or dark ratings to people. Lori believed she was a divine being sent to usher in the second coming of Christ. Together, they built an echo chamber, a fantasy world reinforced by each other, where there were no limits and no consequences, until there were. To understand how this all began, you have to understand who Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell were. Long before they met, Lori was known for her beauty, but behind the charm was a deep obsession with religion and the afterlife. Friends said she was captivated by spiritual visions. She believed she could speak to angels, that she had a divine mission. She'd been married 4 times before she met Chad. Her previous relationships were often turbulent, and her faith only grew more intense with each one. She believed she was chosen, special, a warrior of light. Chad, on the other hand, had lived a quieter life. He worked as a cemetery sexton, digging graves by day and writing by night. His self-published books were end times thrillers, visions of the apocalypse disguised as fiction. In his stories, chosen believers survived the coming destruction while the wicked were wiped out. He wasn't just writing the end of the world, he was planning for it. By the time they met in 2018 at a religious conference in Utah, they were primed for each other. Lori was a devout fan of Chad's books. Chad believed Lori was his spiritual counterpart, literally. He told her they had been married in multiple past lives, and that God had brought them back together for a holy purpose. Chad claimed he could see beyond the veil. He could look at someone and tell if their spirit was light or dark, and if they were dark, they were no longer fully human. Lori soaked it in. She didn't question his visions. She called him a prophet. Soon, they began applying those labels to everyone around them. Chad assigned numerical ratings to people's spiritual lightness. Lori used those ratings to determine who should be trusted and who should be eliminated. Charles, Lori's husband at the time, he was a 3 out of 10. Dark, dangerous. Her children, JJ and Tylee, questionable. Alex, her brother, fully light, loyal. Their connection grew fast and toxic. Phone calls turned into secret visits. Scriptures turned into scripts for judgment. By the end of that year, they weren't just preparing for the end of the world. They were deciding who got to live through it. In July 2019, Lori's husband, Charles Vallow, reached his breaking point. He had tried everything, emails, church leaders, even the police, to warn others that Lori was unraveling, that she believed he was possessed, that she thought she was a god. Then one morning, he walked into Lori's rental home in Arizona. Minutes later, he was dead, shot by her brother, Alex Cox. The explanation? Self-defense. The police didn't press charges, but Charles had left behind a trail of warnings, voicemails, legal documents. His death wasn't a mystery. It was a prophecy fulfilled, at least in Lori's eyes. And with Charles out of the picture, Lori was free. By September, she had packed up her life and moved to Rexburg, Idaho, just minutes away from Chad Daybell. There, the planning continued. Tylee Ryan, Lori's bright, sarcastic teenage daughter, vanished during a family outing to Yellowstone National Park. She never returned. 10 days later, 7-year-old JJ Vallow, who was autistic and relied on routine, disappeared too. Lori didn't file a report. She didn't alert the media. She didn't tell friends. Instead, she smiled for photos, attended Chad's lectures, shopped for swimsuits, and planned her wedding. Back in Arizona, JJ's medications went unfilled. Calls from grandparents were ignored. Friends started asking questions. But Lori had already moved on to paradise. In November, she and Chad flew to Kauai. On the beach, they exchanged vows, matching white outfits, flower crowns, big smiles. No mention of Tylee or JJ, just two newlyweds celebrating their new beginning, while their past was buried back in Idaho. Meanwhile, Chad's wife, Tammy, a seemingly healthy woman in her 40s, had died in her sleep just 2 weeks earlier. It was listed as natural causes. No autopsy was performed. At first, the pattern was becoming hard to ignore. Every person who stood in Lori and Chad's way was disappearing. Friends, spouses, children. Each one marked dark, each one eliminated. By early 2020, Lori's web of lies was beginning to fray. Tylee and JJ were officially declared missing. Their names made headlines. Grandparents pleaded publicly for answers. But Lori refused to break character. She told reporters the children were fine. She told police they were safe. She told herself God had a plan. Then came the arrest. Lori was taken into custody in Hawaii. At her extradition hearing, she arrived in full makeup, in pink lipstick and flowing hair, smiling as if she'd won something. She didn't seem worried. But behind the scenes, detectives were closing in. Phone records, storage unit footage, Chad's increasingly erratic behavior. It all pointed to one thing. There was no alternate caregiver, no family friend watching the kids. There was only silence. And a backyard in Rexburg, Idaho. In June 2020, law enforcement executed a search warrant at Chad Daybell's home. Neighbors watched as teams with cadaver dogs and shovels fanned out across the property. Then the digging began. The first discovery was JJ, wrapped in plastic, bound with duct tape, buried near a tree. Moments later, another grave. This one was different. Burned soil, charred bone fragments, the partial remains of Tylee Ryan. Her body had been dismembered and burned, then scattered in a shallow pit near a pet cemetery. The children had not just died, they had been destroyed. And still, Lori said nothing. No press conference, no statement, not even a moment of silence. Instead, she smiled. Chad was arrested that same day, trying to drive away from the property. Officers pulled him over down the road. When they told him what they found, he said nothing. For investigators, this was the moment the case cracked wide open. For the rest of the world, it was the moment they realized this wasn't just a tragic custody dispute. This was a doomsday prophecy turned execution plan. The world watched as the charges stacked up. It wasn't just a tragic story anymore. It was a criminal investigation unfolding in real time. Lori Vallow was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, and later with the murders of her children, Tylee and JJ, as well as the death of Tammy Daybell. The prosecution painted her not as a grieving mother, but as the architect of a belief system that justified their deaths. In the courtroom, Lori remained eerily calm. Sometimes she smiled, sometimes she cried, but never for her children. Witnesses testified about her laughter at inappropriate moments, her lack of remorse, her certainty that what she had done was righteous. In May 2023, she was found guilty on all counts. The sentence, life in prison, no possibility of parole, no chance at redemption. Chad Daybell's trial is still to come, but the evidence looms large. Text messages, shallow graves, stories of spirits and zombies, and the unshakable fact that 5 people around Lori and Chad ended up dead. Tammy Daybell, Charles Vallow, JJ Tylee, and Alex Cox, Lori's brother and alleged enforcer, who died mysteriously just months after the bodies were found. And yet, even with all this, there are still followers, still people who believe Chad is a prophet, that Lori was misunderstood, that this was all part of God's plan. Their story is a cautionary tale of what happens when unchallenged belief is weaponized, when love becomes loyalty, and when loyalty turns lethal. They said they were building a new world. Instead, they buried the old one. What happened in Idaho wasn't just the result of bad theology or broken people. It was the collision of belief, power, and a complete loss of accountability. And it ended in horror. Think this was shocking? There are dozens more stories like this, some still unfolding. some hiding in plain sight. Subscribe to Join or Die TV for more stories about cults, crime, and control. And tell us in the comments, what cult should we tell next?